Greetings, Princeps, and welcome to the 53rd episode of the God Engine Cast, a podcast dedicated to discussing the Adeptus Titanicus wargame produced by Games Workshop. In this week's show, we're going to be returning to the topic of knights and knight households in Games of Titanicus. As always, a huge thanks to those individuals who subscribe to my Patreon or make one-time donations through my Ko-Fi account. Your support of this podcast is fantastic, and to everyone else, the links are found in the show notes to these two wonderful sites. In addition, I'm always looking for support in the form of reviews and in-person recommendations and just general liking and sharing of my material. This spreads the awareness, which grows my community, which is really good for the show. So thank you to everyone who's been doing this. Thank you to all those who have subscribed to my Patreon and Ko-Fi accounts. Links for both those places can be found in the show notes. Let's move on. And finally, before we get to talking about the main topics of the show, mark your calendars, the 9th of September 2021. I'll be running a Titanicus event at the Iron Halo in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. This event is going to be a 2-day, 6-game narrative style event, very similar to last year, where I will assemble 2 teams of loyalists and traitors, maybe even the odd Black Shield, and over a series of set missions across thematic battlefields, the fate of the small Angoran sector will be settled. More information about this event will be forthcoming as I create it, and will be discussed as we go. I like letting everyone see under the hood, as it were, as I create these events. It hopefully helps others put together similar events around the globe. If you also have input into what I'm doing, please reach out to me. I'm always very receptive to hear other people's advice as well. I want to make the best event I can. And yeah. So we'll talk about that some more in a few weeks. Until then, if you feel like attending, please sign up. I should have some hotel information for those who've already signed up, making it to my Facebook page soon if you haven't seen it on the Iron Halo main page. Okay, let's get on with the show. Okay, a bit of an errata/correction. At the end of last week's episode, I was discussing Legio Salaria and their relative power of their rules compared to other Titan Legios. I mentioned offhandedly that one of the Legios I thought were much better than them, and probably one of the stronger Legios in the game, was Legio Crucius. This garnered an immediate reaction from many in the community, pointing out to me that Legio Crucius weren't really that top tier, and there were many Legios that did what they did but better, particularly Legio Astorum. And without wanting to rehash the entire differences between Legio Crucius and Legio Astorum, I have to admit you are probably correct for those people who reached out to me. Legio Astorum are probably a more powerful Legio than Legio Crucius. They have the same reliability bonuses that Legio Crucius get, but they get them in a slightly better form. Legio Crucius gets to re-roll rolls of 1 during the repair phase and damage control phase for the first 2 turns, where Legio Astorum can roll any dice, 1 dice per Titan, in the same phases. But they can do it for the entirety of the game. So over the course of the game, you're probably going to be re-rolling more dice as Legio Astorum than you would of Legio Crucius. My argument there is I think the clutch repair rolls of the game are the second turn. That is the turn you need to burn away all the heat you've generated from maneuvering and getting your shield back up from the first couple of volleys. Legio Astorum kind of can do it, but they've got to be very careful with how they manage to carry that off. Whereas Legio Crucius, it's just a little bit more durable and will probably go into the combat phase of turn 2 with much more intact Titans. In most games of Titanicus I play, the shooting phase or the combat phase in turn 2 is the phase where majority of the work gets done. It's the phase where the game is really won and lost. And I think Legio Crucius arms itself better for being in a better place than Legio Astorum at that point. Or at least can be with the correct player. But, as I said when I was talking about Legio Salaria, and as I've talked several times, trying to create a power listing of Legios is a bit of a fool's errand. I think we can all highlight those Legios that are weak, the ones that the rules do not work no matter the circumstance. I think the majority of other Legios have rules that can be used, and the correct player or a player will find the correct use for them. And it is sort of correct player, because if you particularly play a certain way that leans into those rules, you will get more out of it. There are builds that Legio Crucius do better than Legio Astorum. I think there are more builds for Legio Astorum, but there are still some very powerful Legio Crucius lists out there. So I think Legio Crucius are on a whole better than Legio Salaria. Their rules work for all Titans, and you can have more flexibility in putting your list together. Which was the point I was trying to make, even if I did it in a convoluted way and inadvertently tried to say they were a OP Legion, which was never my intent. So, apologies, but let's start talking about some stuff that really could be overpowered in our games. Knights. Today we're going to sit down and talk about knights and knight households. This is actually going to be the fourth episode where we talk exclusively about knights and how to use them on the table, specifically knight households. They're a really interesting part of the game, and when I started this podcast, I really didn't have a good grip with what they were. I sat down for episode 12 and really dug into the book and got an intellectual understanding of how they work. Then at the Iron Halo last October or September, I was able to play a few games of Kighticus with a knight household, very small skirmish level games, and I got the basics of how they work on the table. Well, in recent months, I have finally finished painting out my household. I have close to 2,500 points now of a knight household, and I played several games, up to an epic clash level, where a few weeks ago I even managed to fight a War Master with my household. And as I've played and I've read the rules again and again and played some more and talked to other folks about knights households, my opinions have slightly changed. And recently I've had quite a few people reach out to me and ask me questions about how they would put together a knight household list. And while I've sent them to those previous podcasts, I felt like an addendum was needed. Not necessarily saying that anything I said was wrong, just saying there are other considerations you probably want to take into account when thinking of building a household list. And I encourage anyone who's got the knights to have a play with a household list. It doesn't take that many knights to put together a small household list, and it plays Kighticus very differently. Not in a bad way. It's not a way of playing Kighticus that I want to play all the time, but it's really nice to have the option there, as it adds an extra level of variety to the game. So for the rest of this episode, we're going to go through a number of key subjects that I want to talk about at length about knights. The first is talking about the lance, the building block of the knight household. Then we're going to talk about the knight order, knight status called Shaken, and what it does for a knight and where it fits in your broader strategies when playing against and playing with knights. We're going to look at a few of the weird rules interactions that still lie in the game for knights, and the ones you probably have to be aware of. We're going to look at knight stratagems before finally turning around and looking at building some lists, focusing both on my own collection and giving advice to a friend who reached out and asked me how he would put together a knight household, which, if I'm being honest, is the spark that started this entire episode. So let's get on with it. Let's talk about the lance, the core building block of a knight household. A lance is composed of 3 banners of knights, and those banners, when deployed on the table, operate as a squadron. They all activate at the same time and actually have to maintain a coherency with each other or become shaken. This coherency is 6 inches, which kind of seems like a lot in some respects, but once you put them on the table, it really isn't that far. Because of this, you're basically saying that a lance is going to occupy a very small geographic space on the board and have a pretty limited threat range. For the most part, with the exception of the Castus, knight weapons don't go that far, 12 inches, maybe 15. So your threat bubble produced by a lance is going to be fairly short and fairly concentrated. Because of this, most of the time, a lance will attack a single target. They're going to activate in one spot, they're going to move to a different spot, and they're going to attack a single enemy. They'll attack it in waves, and they'll be pretty good if you built the lance right at taking out enemy titans. Individual banners can be concentrated on doing certain tasks. You can have strippers, you can have rippers, and you can have finishers, much like a battle group would put together a Warhound squadron. Or they could all charge a single Titan and utterly rip it apart. Admittingly, if you had a squadron of Warhounds, you could charge multiple Warhounds and destroy multiple Titans with the same charge. So there is a little extra combat threat, but it is, as I said, very geographically isolated. So this is a point of awareness. There's the first flag when you're fighting a Knight household. If you're fighting a Knight household with a Kighticus battle group and you've got a lot of Titans on the table, spread them out. Don't let a single lance get its threat range within multiple of your key Titans. Your Warmaster and Warlord shouldn't be standing close enough together that a single charge from a lance could get both of them at the same time. Unless you've got a plan to counter that charge, which has been done to me, you probably want to make sure they are far enough apart to isolate the lances. Because in general, a lance will only have one real good charge in the game. Once they've charged, they're going to be out of position, and a good opponent will be able to turn around and blast them with some high-strength weapons. Because they're close together, those large blasts will hit multiple units, which means a volcano cannon at a lance rips through it like nobody's business. And yeah, it's a very interesting place to be. Particularly as by the time you buy 3 banners of a Knight banner, you're not looking at a cheap unit. The cheapest lance I've been running recently clocks in at 600 points. It's a major investment for something that is potentially incredibly powerful, but also very easy to take off the table with concentrated firepower. I also want to say this, that in a lot of reviews of Knight households, a lot has been made of the requirement that the Knights in household banners, which are the banners that make up lances, all have to be armed with the same weapons. This isn't a huge issue most of the time when putting together a battle group, because the most efficient way to build a battle group, which we will talk about in a minute, is only taking a single lance. If you're only taking a single lance, one of those household banners gets to be the baronial court, and they can mix up the weapons they're armed with. So the other thing I will say when thinking about lances, and how I'm presumed from now on when I talk about lances in this episode, a lance to me is a delivery device for the baronial court. When building most lances, I put together a large baronial court with a nice selection of Titan weapons, with quite a few bonus stacked upon it, with 2 support banners with identically armed weapons. Quite often, I will run a Cerastus base lance. I'll have a pile of Cerastus in as the baronial court, and then 2 Cerastus Lancer units flanking to support that central court. Which is also where I'm going to mention the third big point that I want to mention that I didn't really talk about in other reviews of Knight households. Although the rules let you mix and match types of Titans in a lance, don't do it. If you're going to take a Cerastus Knight in a lance, all the banners should be Cerastus Knights. If you're going to take Questorus, all the banners should be Questorus. And although the rules allow some limited mixing and matching, it is just not worth it. All Knights have different speeds, and because your coherency is only 6 inches, very quickly into a game, you are going to be limiting the speed of the banners in a lance to the slowest moving Titan. Theoretically, it is possible to put some Cerastus and some Castus in the same lance. I'll talk about that in a bit. But I don't know why you would do it, because you're going to limit the Cerastus' movement to 7 inches. They're going to be moving at about half speed, regardless of whether they're shaken or not, because they have to maintain coherency with the Castus. Now, in theory, they could run in circles and make moves that aren't straight lines. But when you're playing Knights, any move that isn't directly towards your opponent and the target of where that Knight's going to do to make the kill is a wasted move. Which brings me to my sort of third revelation with lances, and this actually applies to free blade banners as well. In fact, this is a general tactic for all Knights in a game of Kighticus. I kind of treat all my Knights as one-shot weapons. Knights are going to be destroyed. They are really easy to break down. There are many ways to destroy knight banners. Although the iron shields give you some resistance to the low strength weapons in the game, there are plenty of high strength weapons that will simply ignore your iron shields and cause critical hits, resulting in you just removing knights from the table by the handful. It's what you're going to have to expect to do when you play with a knight household. Because of this, you kind of have to understand when you're planning your strategy for the game, when is my knight going to be removed? Can I make sure I get something done with that knight before the enemy kills it? Which generally means hiding it until it's time to pounce and do its thing. Hiding it being keeping it out of the arcs of the high strength weaponry, keeping it hidden, all that jazz. I mean, it's standard tactics 101. Okay, and I think with all that said, let's go on to discuss what it means to be shaken. So let's talk about being shaken. Being shaken when I first started playing with knights was the worst thing that could happen to a banner. When you're shaken, you lose your ability to move, you incur a penalty to hit, and more importantly, your orders you can give are limited. Both the order from the turn you would become shaken is removed, and then finally when you get rid of the shaken dice, you have to go another turn before you can issue them a new order, which is really annoying. That well-positioned charge can suddenly be completely negated with a well-placed shaken test or a failed shaken test. Quake cannons are especially bad at that. A quick quake cannon shell into a unit of charging knights, and oh yeah, suddenly those knights aren't charging anymore. But since I've been playing my knight household, I've noticed something. A shaken banner is already basically destroyed most of the time. If one of my knight banners gets caught in the open as they're trying to close on the opponent or get into combat range, then things have gone wrong, and that shaken unit's probably not going to be doing much more that game. In all likelihood, they're going to be destroyed by the end of that turn as they're in the open facing down the opponent. And if they survive, yeah, it's problematic. But for the majority of my close combat-based knights, which are a lot of knights, knights excel in that sort of close combat melee range. If they start shaking you when you are in that melee range, it doesn't matter. Knights are actually really good at hitting. Most of them have a 2+ to hit. Sometimes you even get 1+ to hit when you get really lucky. So taking a -1 to hit won't really affect their combat effectiveness that much. And slowing up your movement when you're already in base contact with the opponent or within stabbing range, again, does nothing to you. So what I'm trying to say is that it's all too easy to consider a shaken banner a destroyed banner. That's not the case. What you want to avoid is shaken banners that aren't in position to do what they need to do. As I was saying while talking about lances, the thing about knights is all about getting them into a position to do their thing before they're destroyed. If the enemy shot at them and not destroyed them and shaken them, the chances are they're still a threat and they're still going to cause significant damage despite the fact they're on their way to being wiped out. There is an exception, and that is the Porphyrions. These knights, the Murder Turtles, as they became known at the Iron Halo last year, are very scary models. They put a lot of firepower out, and they dominate the battlefield. They dominate the battlefield when they're taken as a support banner for Titans. They're incredibly powerful for what they are points-wise, even with the points increase. But one of the most overlooked issues with the Knight Porphyrions is the shaken status. As soon as those Porphyrions become shaken, by taking like a point of damage from a quake cannon, their effectiveness has been destroyed. What makes Porphyrions really good is they're able to turn their 4+ ballistic skill into a 3+ ballistic skill when commanded with a split fire or first fire order. That +1 on their ballistic skill is really good. It turns their shooting from being mediocre, well, not mediocre, but high strength but inaccurate to accurate and high strength. The problem is as soon as this banner is shaken, it becomes high strength and inaccurate as it becomes a 5+ to hit. You can't give that banner an order again. So if you're in a position and the enemy's got a brilliant banner or Porphyrion locked on your position, and you manage to quake it for 1 point of damage, that banner is going to be inaccurate for the best 2 turns. The turn you're currently in, they're going to be shooting at a 5+. The turn after, they're going to get rid of the shaken order, but they aren't going to be giving themselves a new order, so they're still going to be only hitting you on a 4+. It's very easy to use Quake to disable ranged firepower from a Knight household list, which is one of the reasons why Knight lists end up focusing so much on melee attacks. Nearly all the Knight melee weapons get a +1 or even +2 to hit in the terms of the Lancer. So when you're getting this to plus to hit on a weapon skill of 3+ anyway, it doesn't matter if you're going to get the -1 penalty, which is what I'm trying to say. If you're a Knight player, don't be scared of having shaken Knights once those Knights are in close to the opponent. If your Cerastus are 5 inches away from an enemy and they become shaken, yeah, you're going to lose that charge order. But you're still going to be able to move them around behind that Titan that first fired and stab them in the back several times with your lance. And it's still going to hurt them. I mean, worst case scenario, you can pull their Quake cannon off them and the next turn stab them again and destroy them. It's a thing you can do with Knights. And you can't just rely on, as a person fighting Knights, you can't just fall back on a Quake cannon is great for just shaking Knights and stopping them. No, a Quake cannon is going to be okay at slowing Knights and destroying them at crux moments. If you've got a full lance about to charge you with a lance order, quaking them could really slow up that movement. But you're probably still better hitting them with a higher strength weapon, or moving out of the way if you're going to first fire. Like in many things, the rules in Kighticus are not perfect. The same is true with the Knight households and Knight banners. There are a few places where we have to be aware that there are some interesting rules that haven't been clearly defined by an FAQ or by the books. First up is how do Knight banners interact with arcs of enemy Titans for bonuses for being in the flank and rear. There is a really good video, Standard Operating Procedure, by Tabletop Standard, found in the link to this show, they published a week ago, that basically covers this first problem really well. It is theoretically possible to get a banner with a Knight in the rear, the side, and the front arc of an enemy Titan. According to the rules, you pool all the dice of the same weapon's attacks together. But it does not state how you handle this peculiarity. I've seen many arguments about this, and for the longest time I thought that you would just pick the Knight you want to make the attack, and it would gain the bonus dice based on the other Knights that are in range within its banner. That seems to make the most sense to me in my interpretation based off other Games Workshop games, but I'm being fairly convinced by the argument that you should probably break the attacks out into separate pools. It describes you should use that method for deciding if a Knight needs to strike with weapon skill or ballistic skill. So yeah, I think that's probably the way you should do it, and it's the way that Chris decides you should probably do it on the Tabletop Standard channel with his Standard Operating Procedure, and I think I'm in agreement there. Another interesting peculiarity is that of the knightly qualities. Now, I've talked about this before, and I think I will return to it because it remains one of my most annoying problems with Knights. High Scions and Seneschals and High Kings can roll on a table similar to a Princeps trait table to generate some additional rules and bring flavour in from the named houses. In fact, this is the only rule most named houses have. And the problem is it's very unclear which one of those three commanders gets to roll on this table. It's very clear that the Seneschal gets to roll, as it clearly states that in several places in the Doom and Molech book, and many of the rules specifically call out the Seneschal's banner or Seneschal's lance. Many of the other places in where this material is found also refer to the High Scion being able to roll on the table, yet many of the rules wouldn't let the High Scion do anything, so it seems kind of pointless. In addition, there is no allowance for the High King being able to make the use of those rules, but I presume you just treat him as a scion anyway, so that makes sense. But the whole area is a little bit opaque and hard to understand, and I'm really hoping Games Workshop give us an FAQ on this particular issue fairly shortly. There are two ways they could go. They could basically say that only the Seneschal rolls, or that the any of those knight commanders could roll on the table, and the result affects them and their banner, depending on what it's, if it says Seneschal, it means Seneschal, High Scion, and High King, but we will see what happens. In addition to that, there are a few of those traits that also don't make much sense mechanically. The big one being the Freeblade King sort of trait, which was the one that was used at the Iron Halo last year, and I didn't notice at the time, and it ran through the event, and it was only later when I started looking at the trait itself that I realised that it broke one of the core rules of the game. It's a trait that allows you to change out how you compose your army list, but is a trait you roll at the start of the game once your army list is set. So it allows you to do things that you have to have already done. So it's only useful in a place where you can pick the trait ahead of army building. And it's just a weird loop of confusion. So yeah, it's an odd one. Something I will address in a future episode when I talk through the FAQ I'm putting together for the Iron Halo 2021. The other big question mark over the Knight households is what stratagems they have access to. And we're going to talk about the specific stratagems they get in the Doom of Molech here in a second. But in the Doom of Molech is where they list out the rules of putting together a Knight household. And there is a line in there that states that Knight households can only take stratagems from the list found in that book. But it also goes on to say that Titan battle groups can only take stratagems found in the list found in the core rules, ignoring all the other sources of stratagems Games Workshop have put out. So, do the stratagems in the appendix of Doom of Molech itself, like internally it's inconsistent, do those stratagems apply to knights? My gut, and how I've been playing it, is that they don't. That Titans can use those particular stratagems, but knight players cannot. And nothing in the new Loyalist book really clears up this rules mystery either. In fact, it makes it even more vague, as the stratagems in the compilation section are listed as being available to Loyalist battle groups, without actually clarifying anywhere what a Loyalist battle group is. I presume it's a Loyalist battle group is from anything in that book. Or is it just Loyalist Titan legions who get access to it? Both interpretations could be correct. And with the information seen in Doom of Molech, I'd very much lean on the idea that Knight battle groups are limited to the stratagems in the Doom of Molech list. But I don't know. It's a complicated problem, and one I just want to see cleared up with a quick FAQ. Before we finally move away from rules, let's talk for a minute about the Castus, their one unit in Kighticus that is in real need of a version 2.0. It is vastly overpowered, and every time an FAQ comes out, it feels like the rules for this is slightly changed. In the last round of FAQs with the Royalist book, they gained the rule Auxiliary Banner. That means in a Knight battle group, you can only take one of these units per lance, and they operate independently. Now, they also put in the line that theoretically a Seneschal can take a Castus Knight banner as their choice. So you could have a lance within a Castus banner, and then two other Titan banners of your choice to make up your primary lance. I'm just going to say this now, so I don't have to talk about it in a minute. Don't do this. Sure, you are going to be getting the reroll ones on the Castus. That is really nice, and if you get in the right situation, you are going to be shooting on hitting things on threes, re-rolling ones, which is really accurate for a very powerful Titan, which is going to break the game. It's going to be horrible for your opponent until they destroy it. The problem is you're going to be paying a lot of points to pull that off. You need to take two additional banners without a Castus. They can't be other Castus banners, so they're going to have to be other knights. Probably Questoris, as they're the cheapest. Maybe you could take one or two of the Forge Wolf Knights. I've heard they come in fairly cheap and have some longer range weaponry. But I'm not sure where the synergy is. The Castus weapons are really long range, and most of the time, once you get an Castus in position, it is not moving. the rest of the knights in your battle group are going to need to move to get their weapons in range. Knight weapons, with the exception of the Castus, are relatively short range. So a lance with an Castus in it will have 2 bodyguard units doing nothing. And it's a waste of resources in a list that needs to be really efficient with the resources it has. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but the reroll of 1 is not worth the extra 300 point tax you're going to have to pay. It's just not. So, although you can do it, I don't think you should do it, and I'm not upset that Games Workshop have allowed people to take it, as I'm sure it will open up some interesting lists and possible builds. But I do not think it is game-breaking. That says, as always, as every time I talk about the Viforian, what Games Workshop really needs to do is rebuild the weapon card itself to make the banner just that little bit more balanced. Its power level needs to come down dramatically, and then you could run multiple of them in a knight battle group without any worries, and it would look really great on the battlefield. They are some really good looking models. So let's talk stratagems. There are 18 stratagems that are clearly legal for knight households to take. And given the amount of stratagem points the knight households will get, it's very easy to come up with a list that will have 8 or 9 stratagem points in it. You're going to be taking a great many of these stratagems. If you're playing a household list, read all the stratagems and take the ones you want. You're going to be able to afford it. But I'm going to highlight some interesting stratagems that they have. Now, many of these stratagems are alterations on the ones from the core rulebook. For example, they have a 2-point stratagem called Plasma Mines that is basically the same as Thermal Lines. Well, with the exception that Plasma Mines haven't been FAQ'd yet, so they're still strength 10. Though I think you probably should talk about it with your opponent before you take it. Other fun stratagems are Vengeful, which is a 1-point stratagem, that you pick a banner that is down to 1 knight. That knight disregards any order, including Shaken, and gains the charge order. They're allowed to charge, and once the charge order is finished, the knight is removed. They gain some additional bonuses if you wish to make a smash attack instead of a melee attack, which sometimes you'd want to pull off. It's a really fun little stratagem, and jolly good fun, and a way to turn that one remaining knight the enemy didn't quite kill into a powerful weapon for a moment. At the cost of a few victory points, I will add. So another good stratagem they have is a tertiary objective called Glorious Death. It's a 1-point stratagem, and basically you play it to a free blade banner that was destroyed during the game, at which point you remove that free blade from the calculation of any victory points scored throughout the game. This is really good fun, because it's not about scoring your objectives, it's about denying the enemy points. And if the enemy decided to mark that free blade unit as a unit they must kill, specifically if they perhaps were picking a unit of a Castus or something, you can deny them a lot of victory points. It's really powerful. They also have had some alterations to the standard battlefield assets. Obviously, the Void Shield Relay got changed to an Iron Shield Relay. It allows you to reroll Iron Shield saves. It's really good fun in the right circumstances. My preferred favourite conversion, change in rules, is the Power Relay. Now, the Power Relay for the Titans is kind of useless. It allows you to mess around with your reactor heat, and it's okay, but it's a little awkward to use as you basically have to skip a phase. The Power Relay for a Knight is just start next to it in the movement phase and gain D3 to your movement. It is a turbo booster. And it's rather unclear about when the movement ends. My interpretation is it ends at the end of the round, as it doesn't say the end of the phase. It's really fun. Either way, even if it's just the movement phase. An extra D3 movement on a Knight of Cerastus means you can be pushing a unit up the table 15 inches. With a few other movement shenanigans, you could be getting a 16, 20-inch move very easily. That could be a 20-inch charge, which is hilarious if it is a banner of 4 Castus Lancers. Yeah, you're going to destroy the opponent with that, and surprise them as well. And I think it's really important that you look at these stratagems early, and consider the ones you're going to be taking as you build your list. I definitely think the battlefield assets add something really important to the Knight list as a whole, and I generally end up running the Apocalypse Missile Strongpoint and the Macro Cannon Battery, as they add a bit more firepower to your list, and they're pretty hard to take out. Now, an Apocalypse missile launcher isn't a huge amount. It won't just won't take out an entire shield of an enemy. But you can use it to finish off enemy titans, and you can ding off a little bit of shielding here and there and make the enemy have to prioritize a bit of upkeep in the repair phase. Same as the macro cannon battery. It's a strength 10 gun. It's really useful. And if you're trying to defend a point, putting it down near it is a great way to discourage the enemy getting too close. If you're able to down an enemy shield, critically damage its body, for example, with a charge of Questoris Knights, and it's within 12 inches of that macro cannon, the chances are, in the strategy phase, that macro cannon may be able to take that last critical hit and destroy the enemy Titan for you, which is really good fun, and well worth the 2 stratagem points. Okay, I think I've covered all the points that I've not covered in previous episodes now, so let's get on to start talking about some lists. So as I said at the opening of the show, a few weeks ago one of my friends reached out to me and asked me some questions about putting together a knight household. My response grew and grew, and at some point I just said, just wait a second, I'm putting together an episode of Knights soon, and I'll answer it on the episode. So here's the answer. But I'm also going to sort of go through what he's got in his collection and talk about what I would do to turn what his collection is into a pretty good little household list. So last year he picked up the household box that Games Workshop was putting out, which was the Praetorian kit, 2 kits of the Lancers, so 4 Lancers, and then 6 Questoris Knights. Now, any way you cut this collection, it doesn't actually make a legal household at the moment. Or, it makes a legal household because you can make a banner of 6 Questoris Knights accompanied by 2 banners of Lancers, and then have the Praetorians off as a free blade. But that's really not efficient. As I've said, you really want to make sure you're keeping the same type of knights in the same lance. So let's discuss his options. First of all, where does he take it from that initial box set? Well, you need more knights, that's for sure. I'd look at picking up another box of Questoris, so you could turn the 6 Questoris into a Questoris Lance. 3 units of 3. It's perhaps not the most efficient use of Questoris, but it's going to be fairly cheap. Should be able to clock in, I don't know, somewhere around the 500 point mark, even if you upgrade to taking a High King. I would then also looking at getting another box of Lancers, because that would allow you to run 3 free blade Lancer banners, each which will be clocking in to around 160, 200 points. Let's just call it 200 for the sake of argument. And along with your support banner of the Castus, you're suddenly looking at a 1,500 point list, which would be fairly effective. You'd have a central lance to move up secure objectives and put the charge on, and then you'd have these 3 units of 2 Cerastus Lancers to run up the table, maybe even outflanking the odd one for added mischief. All the time the Castus would be throwing quite a bit of firepower down the table. Now you've still got some room for some extra knights in that smaller point list, and I again would look at perhaps adding a second box of Questoris, turning your core Questoris banner into units of 4, so you have 3 units of 4 Questoris. Let's talk about the armament of the Questoris for a minute, because my friend had some questions about that. He asked me, is it legal to have Questoris Knights with dual missile attacks, or dual shooting? And how many missile pods should he have been adding to these banners? Well, yes, it is completely legal to have Questoris Knights with 2 shooting weapons on either arm, as similarly as it's legitimate to have 2 close combat weapons. And as for missile pods, that starts becoming dependent on their use. I actually have 1 Storm Spear missile pod in each one of my banners when I run Questoris as a lance. I actually put it on the Lord Scion or High Scion of the unit. It has a little bit more firepower. It's equivalent to another battle cannon in the squad, and it does add a bit of extra oomph if you've got to strip some shields. I fear that fully kitting out a full banner with them, though, gets a little pricey for a unit that will disappear as soon as someone throws some high-strength weaponry their way. My friend also mentioned what he'd already built his knights as, his Questoris Knights. He's armed them in some unique ways, which is going to make it a bit of a challenge to put together a really effective lance. He has built 2 of his Questoris already, armed with dual melee weapons. 2 of them armed with battle cannon and a melee weapon. 1 armed with an Avenger Gatling cannon and a melee weapon. and one armed with a thermal cannon as a melee weapon. This means at the moment I can't assemble a single banner. So as we purchase that first box set of Questoris Knights, there are a clear way you've got to put the knights out. One knight has to be armed with 2 melee weapons to join the other 2 melee weapon knights to make a close combat banner. Another Questoris Knight has to be given the battle cannon to join the companion with the 2 with the close combat weapon and battle cannons. That produces a second banner of battle cannons. I would consider that unit there to potentially take the Storm Spear missile pods on them, as they could then start throwing out quite a lot of shots. But they are still going to get in close combat as they have their melee weapon, so it may not be worth it. And finally then we have the Avenger Gatling Cannon and the Thermal Cannon chap. I would look at creating a model that looks like your High King to go in this squad, probably giving him a thermal cannon as well, probably with the Storm Spear missile pod. If at all possible, I would look at removing the Avenger Gatling Cannon from the one knight you've built. The 8 dice at Strength 3 is really good until you realise that Strength 3 is kind of useless in Kighticus at the moment. It can't scratch the armour of nearly any Titan, and cannot be used to strip shields, as you need a Strength 4 weapon to affect void shields. It'd be much more useful for you to swap out that Avenger Gatling Cannon with a hand holding a banner. Maybe you've got one from some other Games Workshop system, but then you could count it as having a thermal cannon. You could give the thermal cannon to the High Scion as well, or the Seneschal, or even the High King. And then you have a squad that will be able to reroll 1s to hit with thermal cannons that will really stop an enemy in their tracks and question whether they want to get in close, because that's going to really hurt in combat, as they don't come with blast, so they can be used as targeted attacks in close combat when you're going to be hitting on a 3+. So those thermal cannons get under your shield, blow up a section of your knight with D10 strength 8 hits, maybe even in your rear, so maybe even strength 10, D10 hits, potentially going up to 20s, piles of criticals, easily taking out enemy titans. It's really good fun. If then expanding out to put another Questoris in every one of those banners is easy, just stick with the same armaments, keep with a pure thermal cannon, a pure battle cannon, and a pure dual melee unit. There are some arguments to make a interesting baronial court, but when I talk about baronial courts, I really start thinking of the Cerastus chassis, as I think it's a lot more interesting to build the baronial court with them. Which leads us to the other option that you could do. You could get a very similar style list by not taking any more Questoris Knights. If you were to buy a box of the Castigators and Archaons and another 2 boxes of Lances, you could make a Lance that is purely Cerastus, put together a really fun baronial court with a mix of Castigators, Archaons, and Lancers. I'd always recommend you keep 2 Lancers in it, as the +1 to Ion Seal saves given by the shield on the Lancer is really good for all the knights in the banner. The Castigator's kind of meh, because it has a strength 3 weapon that suffers the same problem as the Avenger Gatling Cannon, but there are a few ways to give +1 strength to the High Scion's banner through the use of banners. So if you throw a Castigator in, perhaps look at giving it a banner that will give it +1 strength in the right circumstances, and it will make it work, because it has 8 dice as well. Finally, the Archaon is really good fun. It is a high-strength flamer weapon, and it really does wonders stripping shields and hitting enemies that start getting too tightly packed together. The Archaon was the secret source of the Freeblade list that won the Iron Halo last year, so I can't say anything but good things about it. So in that alternate plan, I would look, like I say, get those additional boxes. I'd make a baronial court, go to work with conversions, make a really good-looking High King, probably based around a Archaon, but you could give it one of the swords and make it a really unique-looking Titan. I would then have 2 Lancers in that squad, and then I would have it supported by additional banners of Lancers. I would then support that central, highly mobile, very aggressive Lance with some Freeblade banners made of your Questoris, which are there to secure objectives and keep out of line of sight and throw some fire down range. In which case I would build a Questoris banner with your current Titans of using the 2 melee Titans and the Avenged Gatling Cannon Titan that I would put the I'd put the Iron Storm Missile Pod on, and I'd run them up the table aggressively supporting the primary lance. I would then have your secondary lance of the 2 battle cannons and thermal cannon, which would be a free blade unit that would go around the flank and look to hunt. Again, I'd look at taking the Iron Storm Missile Pods fairly regularly on those knights, because I want to up the firepower. I want to use the Iron Storm Missile Pods and the battle cannons to strip shields, allowing that thermal cannon to do a little bit of work. And again, they could be pretty effective, if a little pricey. I think that sort of takes us quite nicely into discussing the lists I've been running, because that list I've just discussed there as an option is very close to what I've been using myself. So a few weeks ago, I went down to Texas to play a game of Kighticus with Lucas, my occasional co-host for this show, and I fought against his Legio Crucius, accompanied by his gorgeous-looking War Master with my Knight household. And he was going to be fighting a War Master, so I put together an extra special list to fight it, which meant that I broke several of the rules of how I would put together a list that I talked about in this very episode. Most of all, I doubled up on lances. And I actually paid for it. I think the game would have been a lot more... I feel like I would have won the game a lot easier. I won the game, but by a very narrow margin, if I hadn't doubled up on my lances. I took 2 lances, both of which came at being really pricey. I had a lance of Questoris that came in at 670 points, and I had a lance of Cerastus Knights that came in at 945 points. I then had 2 banners of Free Blades, just a Lancer, an Archaon, and a Lancer and a Castigator. Both were coming in at close to 200. And then I had my support banner of 2 Castus Knights with a twin Magma Cannon, which was fairly pricey and did what it needed to do in the game. But the 2 lances were really useful. They won me the game, but they also almost lost me the game. The first lance being the banner of Cerastus. So what I had was I had a baronial court of 4 knights. I had 2 lancers, an Archaon and a Castigator, with a battle standard, the shielding banner in that particular unit. That unit itself was really fun. It didn't actually get to do much, as it just got charged by a warlord with a power fist when they got in close and taken out, which, let me just say, is the best way to handle enemy knights. So yeah, that was the thing. The other 2 banners in the lance were Cerastus Knight Lancers, a unit of 3 each time. So yeah, and that's a lot of lancers. I mean, with the 4 in the main lance and the 6 in the support banners of the lance, it's 10 knights in total. It was a lot of area to cover, and if they'd managed to pull off their charge and hadn't been interrupted by my opponent, they would have been devastating. But he got the initiative on me, which we will talk about more next week when we do a deep dive into those games. But the banner itself just kind of flubbed it, and for 945 points, it was a lot of fish in one basket. I need to pull back the point costs I invest in that lance. I need to drop that first banner down to 3 knights, and the others 2 support banners down to 2. Shave some points off, and add another unit of Free Blades. I think it will go a long way. The same is true for my Questoris. My Questoris is 3 banners of 4 Questoris Knights, 1 with thermal cannons, 1 with battle cannons, and 1 with Gatling cannons. This whole unit is given the banner that allows them to get +1 strength to shooting when they get in the position, which is really fun. That Gatling cannon could theoretically let off 32 strength 4 shots, which will rip the shields off nearly any Titan, I'm pretty sure about it. And then the thermal cannon and battle cannons with a +1 strength stand a pretty good chance of finishing the enemy Titan off. Even a War Master I've mathed out, a bit of math hammer there, struggles to stand up against this powerhouse of a lance. The problem is I've tried this trick now in 4 games, and it never works. The lance draws so much fire. It also has the problem that it's running a lot of knights. It just falls to pieces. The 12 knights don't survive to get into the position they need to be in. Once again, I probably need to drop a knight or 2 off the units just to make them a little smaller. Now, I will say, 4 Questoris Knights are really useful to have. You get that +1 on your shield saves. So it's a loss. There is a risk-reward ratio, and I think it may be better just to break out that lance into 3 more banners of free blades, perhaps putting one of those banners in an outflanking position, probably the Melter Questoris. Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm not quite sure whether I'd end up using the Gatling Cannon Knights in this situation, as without the banner to give them +1 strength, they are lacking something. I don't know. It's something that I really need to think about and look at what I'm going to develop into the future. If anyone has any feedback on my list, I'd love to hear it, actually. There may be someone out there who's played a lot more with Knights than I have, and I'm always willing to hear people's point of view. So let's move into some sort of final conclusions about Knights. At least for today. So let's finish up this episode by drawing some conclusions and answering some final questions that I really need to ask. First of all, the big one. Are Knight households part of Kighticus? I mean, the answer is yes, but the answer is also no. The game of Kighticus is a game of managing Titans, managing your void shields, your reactors, your repair tracks, critical damage, managing arcs and precise movements. And all that stuff Knights don't do. Knights play like a 40k army, if I am being honest. And there's nothing wrong with that. 40k is a great game, I enjoy it a lot. And it's really fun that there are the rules that allow Titans to fight something like the Knight household. But it is a different game. I can't say that when I play a game of Kighticus with my Knights that I get the same experience as if I'd had 2 Titan battle groups squaring off against each other. The experience is very different. So, when you're deciding to collect a Knight household, and when you're deciding to play a Knight household, keep your opponent in mind. I don't think a Knight household is a force you can just rock up to a table and just pull out of a bag without telling your opponent first. That little conversation you have at the start of a game with your opponent about what they're going to play, that social contract, I don't know. I just don't see myself ever going to a event where you're doing Kighticus pickup games and being like, hey, you want a confrontational game? Great, let's go and get our stuff. And getting to the table and just start pulling out my Knight household without at least giving my opponent the option of playing my battle group instead. Maybe I give them the choice after they put their list together, thus ensuring they don't tailor a list designed to destroy Knights. But I think that very much depends upon the circumstances and who your opponent is. I know when I went down to Texas to fight Lucas, I told him well ahead of time that I was bringing my Knights. And I'm not sure what he would have reacted to if he'd put together his giant battle group complete with Warmaster, expecting to fight my Incarnum, and then I pulled out my Black Shield Knights. I get this strange feeling that he may not have been that happy. So that also means event organisers, myself with the Iron Halo coming up, and plenty of others who listen to this show who are doing similar events around the globe in the coming months and years. When putting an event together, think about whether you're going to allow Knight households. I still haven't made my mind up for the 2021 Iron Halo yet. There are arguments on both sides. I let them in last year, and one of them won, which was okay. I mean, no one complained about it, but I do have to pause and think about whether next year I should just limit it to Titans. But we will see. I can make the decision in the coming weeks when I start putting together the event pack for it. But anyway, the final sort of group of thoughts I had about Knights is another important one, I suppose. I think Knights are great for the game, and I think the Knight household is also a great addition to Kighticus as a whole. As a supplementary type of force you can fight, it adds variety to the game. And as they say, variety is a spice of life. I think it is really good and a great way to mix up games that occasionally you want to take a break from playing with a battle group, and throwing a Knight household onto the table is a great way to do that. I do think that if I was playing my Knight household every single game, I could get a little bored of it. There are only a limited number of strategies that a Knight household can conduct. I think if I was doing this once or twice a week, like, you dream about being able to play Kighticus, I have a feeling that playing my knights that often would become a bit of a bore. And I know next time I sit down and play Kighticus next month, I'm probably going to be leaving my knights at home and bringing out my Legio Incarnum. I hope that there are some people out there who've been inspired to put together a battle group by this conversation, and I hope for some people struggling to understand battle groups, this episode has helped. And if you're just fighting battle groups, maybe some of my conversation today has helped you. As always, if you think I've missed something, or you have something to add on this subject or any other subject I've covered, please email me at god.engine.cast@gmail.com or message me through Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. I'm always happy to receive those DMs, and we're happy to talk about stuff. Next week's show, or next time's show, I suppose, I'm not sure exactly when the next episode is going to come out, is going to be a conversation with Lucas about the games we played. So a little bit more conversation about Knights, and also talking about the War Master and how it handles on the table. Great conversation, should be out as soon as it is edited and I have time to do the openings and closings. Which is a good time to talk about the upcoming schedule for this podcast. We are moving into the summer. My kids have just had their last day of school and the summer holidays are starting. This time last year, I took a break at the start of the summer holidays to focus on getting ready for the Iron Halo and to enjoy a bit of summer. I don't think I will be doing that again this year, but I suspect the episode with Lucas will be the start of a slowdown in episodes, or at least a slowdown in my production of episodes. My actual release schedule this year has been poor, and not what I've been aiming for. I have a giant spreadsheet of when I'm planning on putting episodes out, and I'm missing those dates that I've set myself by substantial amounts. I aim to put an episode out a week, and that's not been the case recently. I've been doing once every other week, occasionally missing weeks entirely, which is fine. I'm not obligated to put a show out a week. There's no contract over my head for advertisers or anything like that. So I'm going to continue doing the show at my own pace, and it will come out when it's ready. That said, I am also having a problem where I'm starting to run out of planned topics. My list is starting to look very empty, and there are several episodes where I'm just trying to find the right guest to have on. So, if you have any thoughts about shows that I should be covering in the future, or topics, conversations you wish me to have, please email me. If you wish to appear on this show, please contact me as well. Always happy to sit down and talk to people about their suitability of being on the show. So if you can help with any of these things, as I said, just please email me or shoot me a message through the earlier mentioned social media. And I think that will do it for now. So until next time, I wish you all well, and I will see you shortly to talk about the battles I had in Texas. Thank you again for listening to another episode of the God Engine Cast, a podcast dedicated to discussing the Adeptus Titanicus game produced by Games Workshop. This show was written, recorded, and edited by Martin Emery. This podcast is completely unofficial and no way endorsed by Games Workshop Limited. No challenge to any trademarks or copyrights are intended. All rights are reserved by their respective owners. If you have questions for the show, please email me at god.engine.cast@gmail.com or reach out to me through Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, where I am the God Engine Cast. Until next time, I wish you all well and good fortune.